I'm delighted to have Peter Hitchens with me now. Peter, tell us about your latest column from the Mail on Sunday. Well, you made a very good point, very striking simple first sentence, but very striking. Why is Israel the only country in the world that gets blamed for being attacked?
Well, I think there is something very peculiar about it. And
Just looking at your column, by the way.
I'm a long-standing defender of Israel against its enemies, but not an uncritical one. And no one of any sense can be uncritical. Israel often does very wrong, very stupid things, as do most countries, especially countries engaged in war. And I don't hesitate to say that. And also, there is no doubt that Israel exists on the basis of the seizure of land and the driving out of the original population in 1948. Very respected Israeli historians have themselves confirmed this, and it's true. And you have to say, well, that is obviously a terrible thing, but in the era when this happened, there were many other instances in the world of people being driven out of their ancestral lands. And there is, by now, these horrible things have been settled. The people who were driven out were resettled. Their descendants are now living in, I won't necessarily say contentment, but living in reasonable circumstances. Only in Israel is there it's still a United Nations agency devoted to the care of people displaced in 1948, 75 years ago. And you have to ask yourself why the huge and in many cases rich Arab world has not done more to resettle those people. The other point I make is that Israel is by no means the only country which has achieved its existence by driving out or suppressing the previous indigenous population.
America?
Two obvious examples, United States and Australia, where this has happened. Nobody goes on at them about it anymore. I mean, there are people who will quite rightly raise the treatment of Australian indigenous peoples and the Native Americans, as we now, I think, rightly call them rather than Indians. But the fact is their cause is lost and gone, and it's accepted. This has happened. When these tragedies happen over and over again, do you prolong them or do you bring them to an end? And also, why is it that Israel alone of the countries which has this problem is the one which is constantly arraigned before the supposed court of world public opinion about it? So that's one point I make. I try not to be emotional.
Why is it?
Well, so you have to ask yourself, what is it that's so unusual about Israel? Who lives there?
Yeah, anti-Semitism.
I'm afraid, I'm very much afraid. And if you say this to people, you say, well, tell me about your concerns about all the other injustices in the world and show me where you've demonstrated against them or protested against them or written articles against them or generally been concerned about them. Just show me the other parallel concerns which you've shown for similar circumstances. They can't say it, and they say, well, okay, then what is it about Israel that makes it so specific? And they will never answer. So I won't answer either. I will leave it to anybody watching this to work out for themselves what it might be. And here is the thing. This is the origin of the whole problem in the first place. Why does Israel exist? Because the whole idea of Zionism, of the creation of a Jewish state, was deeply unpopular in Europe and among most European Jews before 1939. Very few of them were persuaded of it. They thought it was a bad idea. They could see the problems of moving Jews into an area which was already inhabited by Arabs. There was already a large Jewish settlement in what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, but not a nation. But after the death camps were opened in 1945, even the most obdurate opponents of the Zionist program of creating a Jewish state in the Middle East, even they gave up. They said there has to be somewhere to go. Most people don't know the record of the civilized nations of the world in the period before 1939. They don't know how they simply closed their doors to Jewish refugees from Nazi persecution. Even worse, they don't know that Britain was one of the most foremost in closing those doors because Britain controlled migration to what was then its colonial possession, the Palestine Mandate. And in 1939, having promised to create a national home for the Jews, pretty much ended Jewish migration to that part of the world. 1939, this was after the terrible events of what most people will have heard of, Kristallnacht, in November 1938, when the German government openly sponsored a murderous pogrom against the Jews of Germany. You could not have been in any doubt in May 1939, when we started shutting down Jewish migration to Palestine, you could not have been in any doubt of the dangers of the Jews of Europe from Nazi Germany, and yet we closed it. And it's the most extraordinary event. But this was general at the time. And so but people changed their minds. And so that is, Israel doesn't exist for any other reason than that. Millions of people, some Jewish, many not, recognized that Jews had in future to have somewhere to go if the persecution started again. That's why it's there. It's there because of persecution. But it's opposed for the same reason that it's there. Israel is blamed for existing, blamed for its many wrongs. And I don't quarrel with the people who point out that Israel has done many wrong things. Blamed for all these things without going back to the initial point. The reason for its existence is intolerance of Jews.
Indeed, and I think it's quite right that after the Holocaust, these poor people, these poor persecuted people, the oldest hatred in the world is anti-Semitism, have somewhere to go. In terms of this war, how do you see it unfolding? The thing is that they're obviously going to go in maybe today, certainly within the next couple of days, 300,000 to 400,000 troops. The air barrage will continue. It's going to be hellish. Now, the thing is, I think a lot of people around the world go, oh, Israel, very powerful, massive army. This will be over very, very quickly. They're fighting in a city. It will not be over quickly, will it?
I doubt it. I mean, it's always risky to make military predictions because they are sometimes proved wrong. I doubt it will go well. I am myself against it. I'm also against the bombardments. I've been against the bombardment of Gaza for many years, and every time Israel has done it in recent years, I've written articles saying that they shouldn't be doing it because I think it's a mistake. I think it would require leadership in Israel of an extraordinarily high quality, which I think it lacks, to actually resist the cause down. This is not unreasonable. If this country had been attacked by a neighbor, if people had stormed into English villages and murdered women and children and abducted children and grandmothers and dragged them off to dungeons, if a large part of southern England was still stained with blood, the government would be under the most immense pressure to retaliate in many, many ways from public opinion, from the media and from Parliament. It'd be very, very hard to resist. And you can understand the need to do something.
Yes, of course.
The problem is what you do. And I personally think that the bombardment of Gaza is probably ineffectual in military terms and dangerous in terms of propaganda. It turns the discussion away from why do these people actually burst into Israel and with no excuse, they're not claiming this was collateral damage in a military attack, directly attack and murder defenseless civilians. Why do these people do that? What can we do to change the world so it doesn't happen? And now all the discussion is going to be about the Israeli bombing of Gaza, the Israeli cutting off of water and electricity, the millions of people in Gaza seeking refuge, driven from their homes. And again, we will be back before square one to the point where no rational discussion will take place. What we see at the moment is an Israeli government led about as badly as the United States was led after September the 11th. And you remember at the time, the world's sympathy for America after those horrible massacres in Manhattan was huge and completely dissipated by George W. Bush in its stupid attack on Iraq and also on the introduction of actually quite serious repressive measures in his own country. A missed opportunity, in my view, on a very large scale and a mistake. And I, as I say, as an absolute friend of Israel and a believer that it must be permitted to exist because there has to be somewhere like that, I'm very dubious about this. And also I think it will, in practical terms, there's grave danger of failing. Urban warfare is the most awful form of warfare, in which the attacker has an immediate disadvantage. And I've been to Gaza, and I can tell you I wouldn't want to be a soldier trying to fight my way into it one little tiny bit.
Have we got a sort of potential sort of Aleppo or Mosul coming up here?
Well, you know what would happen? This is a very interesting comparison that you make. When the Russians helped the Syrians to crush what was basically an Islamist revolt in Aleppo, the world said how terrible it was, the Russians were destroying hospitals and all the rest of it. When the West did something pretty much identical in Mosul, there was the amazing stories were told about how we were bombing Mosul all the time, but nobody was dying as a result. Totally unbelievable. And hardly anybody knows it happened. But in this occasion, Israel may be absolutely sure it will be covered. Because here's another fascinating thing about Israel. If you want to go as a journalist to any part of the Middle East, it's quite a palaver to get in. And when you're there, you come under pretty heavy supervision. Anybody can go to Israel, pretty much. And they're free to report almost anything they want. There is a military censorship, which is very light. There are places they won't encourage you to go. But the last time that I went to Gaza, I just went to the Israeli government press office in Jerusalem. I got an Israeli press card. I went down to the Erez border crossing, and I went into Gaza. That's all the stuff. You try doing that, try getting into Gaza from Egypt and see what happens to you. Yeah. You won't get anywhere near the place. Or try getting into Syria as a journalist, then you immediately run into trouble. And so the result of this, Israel being a free country, is that it is the center of coverage, and its misdeeds are covered where the misdeeds of other countries were not. You wouldn't have known for years, for instance, that Syria was illegally occupying Lebanon, but the Israeli occupations were constantly harped on about.
It's extraordinary. Not time to talk about it now, but I'd like to talk about Queers for Palestine, a gay group who support Palestine. They should try moving there. They would not find it a very nice place to live. And a lot of gay people in Gaza seek asylum in Israel because their rights as a gay person will be respected. In Palestine, they are not, but that's a different issue.
Well, it's just an interesting issue because the way in which what you might call the political left in this country, the cultural and moral political left, will generally be on the side of the Arab cause in this dispute. And it's a very interesting alliance between people who are totally unlike each other. The Arab societies are deeply morally and socially conservative in ways that you would think that the left would be at least questioning about.
Yes.
And yet they ally this way. And interestingly, it was the other way round until the late 60s, until the 1967 war. I remember this change beginning. When Israel won the 67 war, and became the apparent overdog rather than the underdog, the left in the West began to change its mind towards Israel to be more sympathetic to the Arab cause. But it is a very, very odd alliance between people who really, if they met each other on home ground, either way, if Hamas came here or if a London leftist went to Gaza, I think they'd both be quite uncomfortable in each other's company.
It seems it's pretty incoherent, some of the stances taken back here to support Palestine. Nothing wrong with supporting Palestine, but some of the people who do so seem to do so in ignorance. Let's come back home, if you don't mind, Peter. Suella Braverman, by the way, so we get last year we had 48,000 illegal migrants came over on boats and dinghies. This year they're talking about 50 or 60,000. They don't tend to talk about the 1.1 million legal migrants who come into this country every year. About 500,000 of them leave, but 600,000 legal migrants come in every year. Government is now admitting that its threshold for allowing these people into this country in terms of what they will earn here has been too low. It was £26,200 a year. They now want to raise that to about £33,000 a year, which I would suggest won't make a blind bit of difference.
It also pretty much takes account of inflation, doesn't it? There's this.
It's not going to make any difference.
Raising the limits in accord with inflation. So it's so much of what this government does is gesture politics designed to give the appearance of doing something, when in fact they have run out of things to do. They don't know what to do. And they're stuck with it, but they have to try and triangulate themselves against Labour, which will almost certainly oppose these things. And by doing so, the Tories hope that they will persuade voters who are against mass immigration to either stay on their side or switch to their side in time for the general election. It's pure electoral politics. I don't think it has any actual value or significance at all in real life.
Talking of which, this sounds like a reality TV show.
So much of life does these days, doesn't it?
Migrants will get 30 minutes to make their case against deportation. Be like countdown, won't it? Right, you're off. Ding, 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 ding. I mean,
how can they do that? I mean, whatever you do. I mean,
you've got half an hour.
I don't know how that could possibly.
I know.
But the Court of Human Rights is going to have some words to say about that. It won't happen, is what I confidently predict. Like almost all these things, it will not actually happen. But it's a good gimmick. Again, people will hear it and they'll think, oh, well, maybe those Tories have got something to say after all, and that will be the intended effect. When it actually gets to the point of application, nothing will happen.
What is this one? Net migration is to stay above pre-Brexit levels. I mean, that's the same kind of thing, isn't it? Can we talk about the Tories have told Rishi Sunak to take on Keir Starmer over his house building plans. Now, Keir Starmer, at what we were told was a triumphant Labour conference in Liverpool last week, apart from the fact he got covered in glitter, announced...
That was the best bit.
Yeah, it was. It was the only entertaining bit. Did you see I keep saying he shouldn't go into stand-up comedy. He can't handle hecklers. All he did was glitter. He kept going, thank you, conference, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was his only response. However, he did go on in his rather lengthy speech to announce this 1.5 million house building plan, which would be built not on the green belt, not on the brown belt, but the grey belt.
The grey belt, yeah.
What does all that mean?
Nothing.
Does he even know?
What it means is that all major political parties are being constantly lobbied by developers for a complete free-for-all. And the Tories have been lobbied by developers and have, in many ways, tried to give in. But, of course, they then ran into big trouble and they started to lose by-elections to the Liberal Democrats in areas where that development would hurt their own voters. So they're a bit wounded on that. But the idea that the starting point of this country's housing problems is a shortage of houses is, of course, wrong. The starting point of this country's housing problem is social. The encouragement of mass divorce by incredibly relaxed divorce laws created huge demand for housing, and then you add to that actually I believe the encouragement of mass migration by governments who want to turn this into a low-wage economy, and for that you need a much larger population, means that we've got more people than houses. It's not a housing crisis; it's a social crisis caused by government policy, and if most people. Whenever anybody starts going on about NIMBYs, I say, well, ask them how far their nearest neighbour's front door is from them. And almost everybody who goes on about NIMBYs and jeers at people who are worried about developments in their area will have neighbours perhaps half a mile away and large amounts of land around their houses because they're very rich from being developers. Most of us don't have this, and we're hugely affected if our areas are heavily developed. So I think there's just going to be a battle here, which the Tories will lose votes on quite badly if they accede to the developers' pressure. But I'm not sure it's a particularly good Labour cause either.
Also, I suppose now is not the time to cost everything out, but Labour keep assuring us that all their policies are costed. One of their policies is to insulate 19 million British homes. That would cost a fortune. I can't believe they've properly costed that. And in terms of this house building scheme, I couldn't make head nor tail of it. He said, that we will build houses not where developers want them, but where the people want them. I have no idea what that means. And also, who is going to pay for these houses? Are they government houses, or are they just asking developers to develop?
Well, you see, if there are several things which, if Labour did, I'd almost be tempted to vote for them if they would renationalise.
Come on, Peter.
No, if they would renationalise the railways, for instance, and say, right, that's it. Privatisation was a disaster. We're renationalising them, and what's more, we're going to rebuild them. Then I think that might get my vote. If they would say, right, we're going back to building council estates as they were before the Thatcher right to buy revolution, then I would support them in that as well. The problem at the moment is that if you build council houses, they're still up for sale. And you build them, and then they go out of the council market. What this country needs, because if you look at what we spend on housing benefit, it is catastrophic and a very ineffective way of helping people get housing. If we had actually maintained council estates as we had before the Thatcher Revolution, we would have much less of a housing problem than we do now, particularly for people who need to move to work. And it would also, they were in many cases very strong communities, which are very resistant to crime and disorder in a way which the broken up communities, which have followed the dismantling of council housing, are not. And this was a big mistake, but they won't do that. And frankly, what's the point of them if they won't do it?
I mean, to go back to my point, what did you glean from it? I mean, is he saying the government is going to build 1.5 million houses, or is he saying that the government, the Labour government, would encourage developers to build houses and make profits?
It's a matter of encouraging developers. It's a matter of making developers always complaining there's no land on which to build the houses they want to build and sell. So what he's saying is, we'll make more land available for you to build them, and then you can sell them. That's how developers work, isn't it? They buy land all the time, and not necessarily land on which they can build.
Yeah,
maybe they'll be able to build on it now.
They buy it and then they hang on to it.
But it's a weird combination, isn't it? Yeah. The Labour Party and property developers.
It certainly is.
You'd think.
I'm hoping to find out what the grey belt is when Keir Starmer...
I think you'll probably find out you live in it.
Yeah, I probably do. But then again, I am Britain's top NIMBY, not on my doorstep.